About today's court ruling is one person who knows John Haggerty quite well. Michael Caputo worked with Haggerty last year on Carl Palladino's campaign for governor. He's joining us tonight from Buffalo. Mr. Caputo, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for inviting me, Liz.
So have you been in touch with John Haggerty or Dennis Vacco or anyone surrounding that whole circle, and what have they said to you?
Well, there are a small group of us, friends and family, who are staying close to John and to his legal team by having only one or two of us contact them. I've heard through a secondhand information that John's doing well, that he's comfortable, and that they're thinking through their options right now, and they do believe that there is clear room for appeal.
And they also, the bail is something that they believe that they're going to be able to handle?
Right. We were kind of disappointed at how high they were asking the level of bail, but John is not a flight risk. He's been at every single one of his court proceedings. He's been cooperating the entire way. He's got a clear path to appeal. There's no reason to think that he's some kind of flight risk.
Yeah. Were you surprised, particularly after the jury's request for a readback and a questioning of the judge as to who the victim was in this case, and then subsequently to so quickly come to this outcome?
I think the only thing more infuriating than waiting for election outcomes is to wait for the outcomes from a jury trial. We all thought that things were moving in John's direction. We heard the questions about who exactly is the victim, and we're hearing reports afterwards that some of the jurors still don't know who the victim was. But in the end, we were glad to see that the larger accusation of first-degree grand larceny he was found not guilty, which carried mandatory jail time.
Right. I mean, when you say that you see that there's a path, or that Dennis Vacco and the co-attorney there see a path to appeal, do you have any insight as to what that might be?
I'm not an attorney, but I look at Dennis Vacco's summation. I thought his argument was very strong, and I thought that Dennis put those jurors into the mindset that there really was no victim and no crime. I think that came out from the questions we got from the jurors. At the end of the day, I think Dennis outlined probably several different paths to appeal in his summation. We were talking about whether or not this was actually Mayor Bloomberg's money. We were talking about just how much people were getting paid, far, far more, for doing far, far less than John was. And we were also talking about whether or not the mayor had actually broken the law by expecting to be able to guide his donation directly into something that would benefit his candidacy. Yeah,
that's very interesting. We're going to talk more about that a little bit later in the show. But what you're speaking of is that the mayor gave a lot of money, and this is legal because there are no contribution limits to what's known as a housekeeping account for a party. But you're not supposed to be able to direct how that money is then subsequently utilized, and that is not what happened here. I mean, there's actually talk of John being an agent, and I think that is something that was also surprising to me.
Well, there was one juror who said that he actually saw the Independence Party as an extension of what the mayor's goals were, an agent themselves of Mayor Bloomberg. I think there is a lot of things questionable in this whole situation. I think this calls to question campaign finance law. It calls to question Mayor Bloomberg's regular activity as a person seeking public office. And I think the messages that come out of this trial will be heard for quite some time.
Do you think that people would have been as interested as they were? And I know that it's been obviously a bigger story in New York City because he is the mayor of New York City, after all. But had he not been as rich as he is? I mean, obviously, if $1 million to him seemed like very little. I mean, that's what came out in this trial, isn't it? That he had top aides who were saying, I assume that the mayor is covering my legal bills, which in fact he was.
It's the truth, and considering the amount of money that John Haggerty received as an employee of the campaign effort, it really pales in comparison to some of the amounts that were paid routinely to the Mayor Bloomberg's top aides on a regular basis. some of the money that was paid to Kevin Sheekey and to Patty Harris, a lot more money for a lot less effort, to me, I think calls into question the mayor's whole win-at-all-cost strategy. In addition to that, now that we've had the blanket pulled back a little bit so we can see some of what's going on inside of New York State politics, we understand that these kinds of gifts with no strings attached are routine for oligarchs and billionaires who want to buy their way into public office.
You know, though, it's interesting, Michael, because you've worked for rich candidates. I mean, you have a long history as a political consultant. Carl Palladino is a wealthy guy, not Mayor Bloomberg type money, obviously, but he's pretty wealthy, particularly by Western New York standards. I mean, when you talk about you've made money off of folks who are wealthy like that too. I mean, it's illegal, obviously, to say that these people can't spend their money any way they want to.
Well, I worked for oligarchs in Russia and oligarchs in Ukraine and other former Soviet Union nations. The one thing that's in common with them that you see very much in common with Michael Bloomberg is that they don't think that the rules apply to them, that their rules are really only for little people. In fact, a small rule loophole like the housekeeping account at an allied political party, one small loophole like that can turn into a huge loophole when it doesn't matter what size of a check you're writing. When you talk about wealthy candidates like Carl Palladino, you can say whatever you will about Carl Palladino, but I don't think he would do anything like what Michael Bloomberg did. Michael Bloomberg was finished with John Haggerty. That's why he lied about him, and that's why we got the verdict we got today.
Yeah, can you just expand a little bit more? I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if viewers recall, Carl Palladino hired John Haggerty in the middle of this scandal. John Haggerty was already knowing that this was coming down the pike. He was preparing for the trial, if I remember correctly. He had been charged with stealing $1 million. That was the Manhattan DA's charge. And yet another guy who had a lot of money hired him anyway. Can you talk us through that thought process?
Well, sure. I actually was in most of those meetings with Carl Palladino. I was with him when he first met John Haggerty. In fact, we both met John Haggerty for the first time together. The one thing we understood after having long conversations with John and hearing every detail of his situation, in fact, nothing I heard at the trial was a surprise to me or anything new, because we knew everything about what had happened to John after we met him, and we realized that John Haggerty is a very good man. John Haggerty is the kind of person that would be much more easily compared to a choir boy than to some kind of criminal. And we knew that we could either turn our backs on a good man and probably lose the race, or embrace a good man and get a ticket to the show. We were proud to stand with John Haggerty. I'm proud to stand with him today, and I was proud to be with him during summary arguments on Tuesday.
So you don't believe that he stole money from Mayor Bloomberg, although he did get this large sum, and he may or may not have provided access security for the 2009 campaign. I mean, that's obviously in dispute, and the jury found for the prosecution with that. But your experience with him is that you don't believe he would steal.
No, in fact, I don't think John was stealing. I think John delivered a service, and I think also people don't take into account the fact that John had been volunteering for a long time with Mayor Bloomberg and was trying to get off the campaign as a volunteer when they came at him and told him they wanted him to do ballot security. At the end of the day, the one thing that we all know now is a little bit more about the political process, a little bit more about campaign consulting, and there's a lot of truth to that idea of it being a sausage-making machine. You don't want to see how it's made, but in fact, these kinds of things go on all the time in American politics. They certainly go on in New York State politics. There are stories of senators who were paid $500,000 just to help wire a contracting deal. I know lobbyists in Washington who made $3.5 million making 2 phone calls to the Housing and Urban Development Agency. It's not pretty. It gets dicey at times. In fact, it gets downright ugly. And this example of Mayor Bloomberg manipulating the system and then throwing his friend under the bus to pay the price for it is a great example of how things go wrong.
Well, certainly there are a lot of dark corners in politics, that is for certain. And I'm sure that this is not over. I know that Dennis Vacco is going to be appealing, as you and I mentioned, and we will be following the story. In the meantime, I want to thank you very much, Mike Caputo, for being with us.
Thank you very much, Liz.